Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope you are all well. Thank you for joining our webinar to deep dive into the world of decarbing the fuel cycle and how it affects you. My name is Dipak Karki, and I founded DK2, which is an investment and financial advisory firm, but we're focused on the decarbonisation part of the global shipping market. Today, we'll cover how the global pressure to decarbonise will affect your operations, ship finance, and ultimately your profitability. Plus some new methods that ship owners and charters are using to measure their carbon footprint and looking to improve the CII rating and then the future of the carbon intensity index relative to this fuel EU tax at the moment, and also the element of fuel EU as well. Now, it all sounds daunting, but luckily I'm joined by one of shipping's brightest minds in the field of decarbing the fuel's life cycle, Jonathan Arnault, founder and CEO of FuelTrust's. Now, he's a serial entrepreneur and IT engineer, holder of multiple software patents which are used by FuelTrust's. Jonathan, good to have you. Tell us a bit more about you and what you at FuelTrust's do with those patents.
All right. Thank you, Deepak. FuelTrust takes an end-to-end view of the fuel life cycle. We use real measurements to deliver accurate and auditable and valuable data for the real well-to-wake carbon burden of marine fuels and others. And with that, we can help fuel suppliers and fuel buyers to substantially lower their environmental footprint and do so across the entire industry value chain of shipping.
So does this mean you're pushing the use of alternative fuels for the vessels?
Well, certainly we do it for alternative fuels, but we do it for any fuels. We are working in the early phases with our alternative fuel providers to provide certifiable blue and green fuels into the market, but we also lower the emission footprint of fossil fuels and greener blends as well while this transition is occurring.
Okay, well, that's interesting. One of the things we're hearing from our ship owners is that they really don't have the control over the bunker purchases. Now, those, as you know, are done by the charterer. So how does this, using the right fuel, the right way, impact the ship owner and separate them from the charterer?
Yeah, that's a great point. When we first started working on our patented technology, we did speak with a lot of ship owners who had real concerns. But as you've said, they see that the emissions problem is really something that only the charterer can control. And that's somewhat true, but the ship owner still has a short and long-term impact, and they have concerns that they need to address. And those impacts and concerns are directly tied to the ship's marketability based on its CII and its history. The second is the value of the vessel and its financing costs. And those are directly affected by the ship's carbon footprint. And then also, as you've said, charterers, they absolutely play a key, if not the pivotal role. And they need to have clear directions from the owners on reducing the total cost of carbon impact. And the agreements that they form have to clearly outline that and outline the mutual benefits to both of them for doing so.
Well, that seems like a challenge, right? The challenge probably seems like this catch-22 situation that they're in between the charterer and the owner.
Well, I would say it's not that they're in a catch-22. It's that they put that tension of value between the two of them puts the industry in a bit of a catch-22. The regulations that have come out really, they do overlook the charter. They go to the ship owner because they have the valued asset. And yet that catch-22 has to somehow be overcome by this mutual benefit. And where that mutual benefit comes into is them being able to do something about it and being able to measure that.
Okay, so what can they do to do that in terms of overcome this catch-22?
Yeah, so there are a number of providers out there who have differing approaches to it, but each of those approaches same outcome of run your ship differently, right? Not really changing anything in the background, not doing anything with regard to technology. What What Fuel Trust is doing is something quite different. We are actually looking at the source of emissions, the fuel, and then tying that with direct measurements using what we call soft sensors. And those soft sensor measurements provide a significant differentiation on real emissions output, not just the standard formula that everybody is using out of Annex 2. And this helps by producing these actual outcomes, giving you a better CII and telling the charterer and the ship owner the value that's been created, that they can make that part of their parties, their contracts for the counterparties. Not only that, but it helps class in deciding what is the outcome and what is the value of the bunkers and emissions that come from them.
That sounds great in terms of the outcome, but can you clarify what the soft sensor was? What do you mean by that?
Thank you. People, when we think of sensors, immediately jump to a piece of hardware, something that's taking air samples, running it through microchips, some little micro lab, and then sending data someplace from the hardware-bound calculation. All right, and it's really important to understand. Hardware sensors do a calculation. Soft sensors do a calculation. They are not simply spreadsheet mathematics. It's chemistry and intelligence, software. Whether the software is on a chip or the software is someplace else, it is taking measurements and running it through software. So that's important to understand. And I've spoken with a lot of classes, members, engineers in class, and they kind of sort of get it, but they kind of don't. The idea, the reality that all a sensor is a piece of hardware with a little device and software on a chip. And what soft sensors are is taking, yes, that material device, whatever that device might be, and it may be existing devices on a ship that do similar but not discrete work, meaning a CO2 sensor, a sulfur sensor, a methane sensor, etc. A soft sensor is able to take a generic piece of hardware and move the software and intelligence off chip to someplace else in order to get a much deeper set of data out of what that generic device is doing. That's what a soft sensor means. We early on, when we formed Fuel Trust, looked at a very hardware sensor based approach, discrete devices on the stacks of ships all over the world. And then in that investigation, what we found, and by the way, we were looking at using sensors that are used on power plants, right? Coal or other fuel-based power plants. And what we found on real maritime usage is that, number one, they had a very high maintenance cost. You had to go, turn the ship off, let the stack cool, and then climb up the stack and tweak the sensor every quarter or every 6 months at least. And that's downtime for that ship of 6 to 8 hours on average. Not only that, but those sensors have an incredibly high failure rate. They are designed to be in a static position in a very, land-based environment. The harsh environment and the utilization of them of the marine environment cause a high failure rate. And those sensors are, $50,000 each on average. So we ruled out hard sensors in 2022. And we realized they were not economical to scale. They didn't have the ability to be managed on a shipboard environment by the ship's crew, and therefore you would have to come into some port where you could get an engineer who understood them. Way too expensive. So once we determined that, we went back to inventing, and we had already had some patents around artificial intelligence. And so we took that and we were able to combine it with data that comes from existing generic shipboard systems, meaning the hardware that's already on those vessels and managing the engine and the manifold, and then tie that with our AI to create this soft sensor. Again, instead of software being on a chip on the stack, it's software that's out in our system in the cloud, tied with this shipboard systems. Hopefully that answers.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you for breaking down the difference between a soft sensor and a hard sensor. I'm definitely educated already. So what does that mean for the hardware providers, the hard sensor advisors? Does that mean that's the end of them?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. In fact, because of what we found early on, hardware sensor companies have not made any real inroads into the maritime industry. Really, no appreciable inroads at all. And by what we do, we actually are able to bring what they have, even if it's at a smaller scale than every ship having one. If it was 2 or 3% deployment, that would be a dramatic growth in their marketplace. Without something like what we do, hardware sensor companies will not be able to take their existing devices, retrofit them for the marine environment in any economical scale. So if anything, we are creating opportunity for them rather than being counter them. And the other side of that, though, when we invented this, when we did our testing with one of the major exhaust gas associations, we took our results from a ship or from an engine that they had in their lab and gave them our results. They ran their results against their lab-based vacuum sensors. They asked us what was the manufacturer of our sensors because we were within 4 decimal places accurate to the measures. Their chips were 4 dot, some percentage, right, of variability. So they thought we were using a new sensor type, but it was a hardware-based sensor. And we were accurate with all of their, industry lab certified sensors against it. So this being able to have a hardware-based sensor sale and say, you don't have to have it for every ship. You can use soft sensors and verify it. Or, as we've done for a particular customer, we told them where their hardware sensors were drifting out of alignment well before their sensor fired off an alarm, months before their sensor fired off alarm. So they could schedule the engineering maintenance of their hardware sensor. So this can be an opportunity for both.
So it's not just complementary, maybe, but bringing complementary. There's lots of as you said, there's technology out there on the hardware, but here, Fuel Trust, the soft sensor part has its significant advantages as you described earlier. Now, bringing it even more closer to the shipping industry, which obviously we're here to tell our audiences. Now, there's so much out there about Fuel EU, maritime, Fit for 55, IMO 30, all these dates and so these technologies that are out there, okay, and they're obviously ship owners, operators experimenting with them. Now, can you expand a bit more, because you are the guru here, about all these technologies out there which owners and operators are looking to seek? So, people aren't using them yet, right? Or it's not as dramatically as we are potentially seeing.
Yeah, the regulations you mentioned that both are now and fortunately are being forecasted well into the future. That like Fit for 55, that's outlined. Yeah. We know what that means. How to get there is a problem. And there are a significant number of technology providers out there. So firstly, I would say we are seeing in some of the largest fuel providers globally, some activity, but I'm personally surprised at the slowness of the adoption of fuel and carbon technologies, both by the suppliers and by ship owners, because there's some real advantages if both parties will do so. I'll give you an example. So like a positive example, there are some large providers, they're well-known names. They didn't pay me anything to say this, but companies like Trafigura or Minerva, just as examples, we see that they are currently investing in providing Scope 3 reporting for the bunkers that they sell to their customers, right? So what is the inbound carbon of transportation to the ship owner that are on top of the bunker content itself? So well to tank Scope 3. And they are using the recommended EU calculation for that rather than a real assessment at this point. But it does help the customer basically with a carbon VAT. It's not what people call it, but that's really what it is. And then others, we see them putting some generalized estimates, basically what you could do yourself in a spreadsheet, and yet they're doing that shortcut for the customer by providing on a bunker delivery note. We do see physical suppliers, those that are sourcing and storing and selling the fuels themselves. We do see that they're getting a lot of pressure to provide real well-to-tank measurements when they're responding to an RFQ. And I expect that pressure will increase dramatically. So that type of technology at the well to tank side, I do see really picking up, and the pressure to pick up happening more and more.
And then, going back to this soft sensor element to an extent, but so what software is being used by the ship owners and charterers then?
Yeah, historically, ship owners have left a lot of what software is used to manage a ship to the technical manager. And we are beginning to see in the market a shift from that. Certainly, fleets have had their general ledger or their ERP systems separate from that, but ship management has been left to ship management. We are really seeing a general shift from there over the last few years. There are some real familiar names, and they've put some very nice new features in the last couple of years. They do use general mathematics, the Annex 2 mathematics, in their ship management reports, but they are making it easier for the ship owner to use, or the charterer to use their software. So, for example, Vesson, the big commercial name out there, they've added reporting. It is the Annex 2, but it is doing that calculation for you. You can just run a report. Bernard Schulte Group, they've come out with some excellent management software. I'm very impressed with what they've been creating. And not just for the ship owner, but for the charters as well, and tying between the two. So I really do compliment them on what they've made. There are a lot of new innovators, and I do think that there'll be a shakeout, meaning, after the curve in technology, ship owning or ship management is no different. There are these new players like Orbit MI or StormGeo. StormGeo has been acquired, but those types of companies that have come out with really nice new technology or software. But again, on carbon management, they're not doing anything different than anybody else other than the way in which they integrate their reports. And then you've got these others like Zero North or RightShip that primarily have a whole lot of consulting recommendation around software that they use and expose to their ship owners or customers. They have some very good capabilities, but on the carbon management side, none of them have really yet differentiated themselves. There's not a different outcome from one system and another because none of them are using real data other than I bought this fuel, this is the calculation number, give me the output. So you can do the same in Excel on that carbon management as they're doing. I'm not dismissing them. They are making it easier, but none of them are really providing differentiation for the user of their technology from a carbon management standpoint.
Okay, understood. I mean, from that perspective, where's the added value then if people are just reporting standard, or let's call it glorified Excel spreadsheet in a nice format?
Yeah.
Rather than being harsh.
No, I think they're maybe a little harsh, right? But they're trying to make it easier for their user. Right. And so we can appreciate that and taking away human cost of doing those calculations. Fine. What we do is not what they do. Right. I want to be very clear. Our technology is meant to be a high value add into those platforms. We are not a ship management platform. We don't ever want to be. FuelTrust invented this soft sensor technology with our back end integration that goes into those types of softwares and leverage those ship management systems and the mandated fuel tests. We take that to give an accurate measure of the actual emissions of that vessel. And the differentiation is that because we're doing actual measurements, it's usually 4 to 6% lower than those Annex 2, the maximum amount of emissions that could come from a particular bunker. And on some ships, if they've got some increases to their engine, their emissions management system, et cetera, we've seen low double-digit differences because we're measuring the actuals, right? So we are providing a difference and inside or integrated with those ship management platforms.
So just to be clear, what I heard was mid-digit to low double-digit actual reductions in the carbon reporting, which you are only providing and not the other software providers out there.
Yeah, and they are not intending to. They are software providers. They're not doing actual measurements. That's not the business they're in. And that's perfectly fine.
Wow. Okay. Look, as a ex-ship finance banker, I mean, this will impact, I can already see financially when, we talk to the Poseidon Principal banks, which are almost, I think, over 30 now. But then I also heard about the lab testing. Can you expand upon that?
Yeah, some of your listeners might know those scientific names, gas chromatograph, et cetera, et cetera. But for the ship owner or charterer, we use the mandated COA tests, right? The 8217s. That test, we take that as they've already got. We don't need new ones. On the supplier side, we do want more stringent tests. We want to know the molecules of this particular batch of fuel that's gone into the tank of that ship and through its engine. So within 2 steps of getting on board the ship prior, we want a more stringent test, and I won't go into detail there. Our patented technology is able to do some pretty amazing things to tell you all about the chemistry of every bunker, right? And from that, we can tell you about what will happen in that particular engine under what particular load, and then taking that onboard ship data, we're able to tell you what the actual emissions were.
Wow. Okay. So if that's a case of actual emissions, reducing risk, I think what you highlighted here, right? So is there an insurance play in terms of risk reduction to the owner or charterer?
Yeah. So we have talked about this for some time, but certainly we are helping the ship owner or charterer reduce the risk of a bad fuel batch or a bad bunker, right? In the shipping parlance, we call that a bunker. So because we're looking at a bunker both on the supplier side and the ship side, and we know all about the chemistry of that fuel, we know what will happen to it and whether it can be okay to burn or not okay to burn, if it's got, supply chain issues. We also end up creating an analysis of a supplier's outcome of their bunkers over time. So what are higher risk suppliers or even higher risk storage tanks in a particular port, right? We catalog that and have some understanding, not just in a data warehousing, but an alerting function when we see something go through a high risk value chain. In that world, there is risk reduction to the ship owner and to the charterer and to the insurer. So we do think that there is an opportunity there.
Okay, so what do the P&I clubs say about that? Is there, is that? I mean, do the ship owners now get a break, a reduction in premium?
Okay, we are still a pre-funding startup, right? We are bootstrapping this. We have done, the last 4 years ourselves. We haven't run an actual program with the P&I clubs. We have had preliminary discussions. We have had those, but I have never seen in any market an insurer cut someone's rate without hard negotiation by the customer, the insurance customer. So I have seen them, though, credit against risk when that customer can prove that they've had a risk assessment and they've got risk mitigation processes like what we do. So stay tuned on that. And if a ship owner is really interested or a P&I club is interested, glad to talk with you.
Okay, well then in that case, I mean, ultimately, you're here as FuelTrust and highlighting the benefits. So why should an owner or a charterer manager use FuelTrust and its soft sensors, patented soft sensors?
Yeah. So look, if it really does come down to money, if you are a ship owner or pool manager and you're looking to truly capitalize your hulls at a greater value in getting free equity based on measurable carbon reductions, we, FuelTrust, are really the only source for you right now in order to be able to accomplish that. And then more importantly, and we've experienced this with customers, for ships that are struggling with their CII outcome, you can leverage our products to get a real measure of the carbon to fuel output, along with giving you insights where you can make some onboard changes that you can use in order to update not only the patterns of your vessels, but the outcome of your pattern with them. And I'll just use that phrase. Additionally, I'll say older ships that have had maintenance upgrades that do affect their efficiency or emissions, you will get a rapid payback. In every case, that payback has been less than 2 months of the cost of our products for the cost of this, right? You are getting an extremely rapid payback that affects real-time cost and the value of that hull.
Wow. Okay, so now we're talking about money, which is really important here. Sounds like, so if you have an older ship, they can benefit from the correct measurements, right, and the improved CII rating you're providing, and that, with that combined with the banks that maybe signed up with the Poseidon principles, well, actually maybe other green financiers out there, and there are plenty of them, that would have a benefit to be able to show that in a clear and measurable way.
Yeah, so I have had a lot of one-on-one conversations with Poseidon principal bankers and including members of the Poseidon board. They are dead serious about offering preferred rates for those that lower the carbon footprint of their vessels. They are really serious about it, but only where it can be measured, not just some glossy paper. This opportunity, right, that they're presenting, that includes refinancing of a ship after upgrades or the implementation of advanced fuel management programs, not just new hull builds. For example, last year we did an analysis for a tanker fleet. That was a public report that came out, or public announcement. They had several older ships that had, less than stellar ratings. They had a good management program, but they were not yet able to prove it. Using the worst case estimations of the, IMO Annex 2, they had a really rough carbon footprint in the marketplace. They hired FuelTrust's to do what we call a carbon baseline. That's going back in time and with all the data from the ship historically, and that covered a couple of years before the upgrades that they had done. They dry docked. They had upgraded some of their engine. They had put some sulfur scrubbers on several of them. They had done a very special Seacoat silicone bottom paint. The result of that was we went back in time. We looked at where they were and then what they were performing at in the current year. So we were able to get 9 months plus of data. And we were able to prove that they had, in the least of the vessels, a 6.5% carbon reduction year on year. So a dramatic improvement in that vessel using standard operation, not just limiting the amount of travel. In fact, one of those ships did 60,000 miles, in that 9-month year. I mean, they were running that thing all the time. The values of those hulls suddenly jumped because of the improvement that they had by several millions each. And that led to free equity for those hulls and lower financing costs. And so with that value wasn't just theoretical. They were actually able to capitalize on that first in financing, and then they actually sold those older ships within that year, taking advantage of that higher rating. And they did so, the buyers of those financed that with green financing principles in order to take advantage themselves of that lower rate. So it makes a real measurable financial improvement for those customers.
That's pretty amazing, right? From a numbers guy. So if you are able to increase the whole value, so there must be something in it within the CII rating from vessel values out there. So, which is fantastic. And then obviously then the ship financiers leverage off the higher values, which allows the owner to take equity out, correct?
That's what we've seen, yes.
Perfect. Okay, so just to put it, so I want to make it really simple for me. I love being simple. Now, I didn't hear enough about the benefits of, so using and decarbing now, fine, but as you know, there's a whole program ahead. So how can the benefit to ship owners and the benefit to the charterers, how can it go beyond, let's call it the next couple of years? Because there's obviously a reduction in the EU ETS, which your reduction in the CO2 will directly impact. So what do you think beyond that in terms of financial impact?
Yeah, well, certainly we see in the financing of the vessel these direct advantages, and I do expect that will increase. There appears to be a strategy of these green finance loans or financing of these vessels. Again, both existing vessels with updates and new builds, that banks and or other financing organizations are beginning to increase and put more benefits around. I mean, look, you're the finance guy. You've been a banker in this market for quite some time, and now you have your own firm. So what do you think the benefits to those lenders are? I mean, why is this lender giving up money for these green finance terms?
Okay, I'm interviewing you, Jonathan. That's why it's especially good for me. But okay, look, I think well, look, I think you're right. Okay, clearly you're right in terms of the impact. Now, what we're seeing is the pressure on banks, primarily from the regulators, but that's really coming from the shareholders as well. Because the shareholders are these pension companies, asset managers, who are having the shares, and they're seeing the pressure or passing the pressures onto the banks that way. Now, we're also seeing Basel IV come into play. That's impacting the banks. And so most banks want to have more modern ships so they can highlight the lower carbon intensity of lower or modern ships versus older ships. So I think that is critical. We've seen that shift over a number of years since the global financial crisis, actually. Now, the green financiers are looking at lower CO2 to make them more competitive relative to, let's call it, existing banks, because they're funded in a different way. The investors want something different. They want to see a social impact. And what more than saying this ship with a lower CO2 footprint is better than, or is better to fund that ship than something which is 20 years old and hasn't been improved. So let me move on to the, I suppose, the environmental factors of why these banks are going down this route. Now, they've taken some very negative press, right, in terms of banks as well. So again, they're trying to shift themselves into a lower carbon industry. And there's nothing more heavy CO2 impact than shipping. So I think what we're trying to see from financiers is, one, lower footprint to continue their operating model. You know, we're seeing a lot of banks move away from tankers and financing crude, right? So therefore, again, this is the shift that we're seeing. So I think we're in a position where in the third parties, like the classification societies, they are the ones who are measuring, okay, or being the verifiers. But actually, the class societies, I think, where is their impact? They are reviewing IMO and EU regulation. So, I mean, how does that regulation, actually, that's a good point. Where does the regulation fit for you then, for your CO2 measurements from class? Let me go back to you, Jonathan.
Sure. That was a lot between the two of us, and I'm glad we're having this dialogue, right? So class impacts us pretty dramatically, not just us, but everyone in the market. I think what's the biggest is because we are not just running the IMO 2 Annex 2 calculations, we're providing something very different and differentiated. It's outside of the experience of this industry. If it can't be turned with a wrench, this industry really isn't familiar with it, right? It's very hardware, physical based industry. And class societies fit into that, right? They've grown up with this industry over the last 100 or so years. By their nature, class societies focus on safety. And they have processes because of this that are slow and cautious. Software particularly, and soft sensors are something new, especially AI-based ones, they are entirely outside the experience of almost all of the class societies, right? That's not what they had historically been involved with. Fuel Trust has already, I'm just reality, we've spent several tens of thousands of dollars both educating and trying to create proof models with these classes, or the ones that we have MOUs with, memorandums of understanding with. But there's still no process, whether in the EU or in any of the global class societies, for verifying a new carbon reduction technology that is not a piece of hardware, right? A scrubber, right? And even with the lab tests results that we provided, which are highly measurable, completely scientific, very data driven, they're just having a hard time putting their heads around it and creating a program, even though we paid them for programs. So we're frustrated. Let me be clear. That frustration at one point led us to even looking at abandoning shipping altogether and moving completely over to alternative fuels and upstream energy markets, even though we come from a maritime base. There is a desperate need for decarbonization, and yet technocrat approaches seem to be very limited in their thinking about how to go about that.
Well, we don't want you to move away from maritime, Jonathan, because clearly, you've got there's a lot of time and effort that you spent here within FuelTrust and what you're doing at the education side. But I think the industry needs this, right? In terms of one, measuring accurately, measuring it cheaply, right? And looking to ensure that the actual level of CO2 is being reported correctly. So, and I think you mentioned about the improving the bunker quality with the software. So, look, Jonathan, we spent way too long than we thought we were going to be. So, but thank you for your insights. Very complex subject, which we've tried to break down, hopefully, for our viewers. So, I think, from again, simple process. I think there's three things that I'm taking away quickly. So, the charters have a heavy role in making sure they are measuring the emissions, okay, and ship owners who benefit from requiring these measurements accurately. The older vessels, I think you highlighted, have probably a better situation where they can leverage asset value and by improving the efficiency which they're having to do, okay, to make their vessels more efficient, and they can monetize that by improving their CII. And finally, I think is then this issue about obtaining financing from vessel improvements in the valuation from Poseidon Principal banks, but also from my perspective, other alternative lenders and green financing funders out there, making sure, as you said, measuring in real time to get the correct CO2 output. So, Jonathan, I think I've wrapped up with three things. Anything else to say before we fully close this webinar?
If I can, I'd say two other things. Number one, push your class society, right? They do want to do something innovative on emissions reduction. They really do want to do something, but it's always a triangle, right? You've got the ship owner, you've got the innovator, that would be us, and you've got class. But class is always driven by the ship owner's need. You are their customer. I would say the other is, the reality. Maritime has always been slow to adopt new technologies. However, the tightening global regulations and the need to innovate to get higher profit, right, to maintain profit in many markets, and that includes heavy customer demand for greener shipping. All of those pressures are reaching a tipping point. And FuelTrust was designed around those when we foresaw them in the future. So it's okay to invest in technology, but don't go it alone, right? Leverage those innovators that are doing something that actually make a difference. And hopefully we can be one of those four folks.
Brilliant. No, thank you for that. So class, get in touch with them and make sure you're in a situation where we know it's slow. But let's try and improve the time period, right, in terms of adoption. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for everybody watching and staying with us. Okay. So hopefully we'll be able to update more regarding FuelTrust over the next towards the course of the year, and then also get in touch with us to discuss the financing of these vessels, and also hopefully looking to decarb your vessels and your voyages accordingly. Okay. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you, Deepak.